Welcome to the Mind Chimp Podcast.
Hey Mike, welcome to the Mind Chimp Podcast. How are we doing?
Doing great. It's a Friday afternoon heading into a long weekend and a vacation week at that. So it's pretty good place to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Mike. And I guess the few opening questions I tend to say is I tend to ask my guests kind of what's their log line, or how do they summarise themselves in a sentence? What would yours be?
Well, I think just sort of eternally curious is kind of a good way to capture me, or at least the way that I would capture myself. I've always just enjoyed the process of learning. Even when I was a school kid, I didn't think school was so bad because I like to learn, and started at a young age and have never stopped.
Okay, cool. Internally curious. I like that. That's really good. So the next thing I tend to ask my guests is kind of how I've got a list of numbers here, and what I want you to do is I want you to pick 4 numbers from me, please. So it's from 1 to 100. So just any 4.
I lost you a little bit right there. Could you just repeat that one more time?
Yeah, sure. So what I need you to do for me now, Mike, if you could, is I need you just to pick 4 numbers for me from 1 to 100.
Okay. Just randomly?
Yep.
Okay, 14, 23, 47, and 52.
Perfect. To be honest, with most of my my guests on the show, that tends to be the hardest question.
Yeah, it was not easy. It's surprisingly difficult.
Yeah, it's just a strange one, and we will come back to that.
Okay, cool.
But I guess, I just want to start right back at the start, really, with you, Mike. When you was in school and the teacher would say, Mike, what is it you want to be when you grow up? What is it you would say back to that teacher?
Oh, I think when I was a kid, I like a lot of folks, I wanted to be a professional athlete. So probably professional baseball player when I was young.
Is that something you've kind of took going from kind of a childhood into adult life? Do you still practice baseball and stuff? Do you still play, or do you not do that?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to get a pickup game of baseball anymore, but I played all through growing up. So from before school was out until school started again at the end of the summer.
Okay. Interesting.
All-star teams and traveling teams and all that sort of stuff, and played in college a little bit too. So I got a bit along the way, and then at some point, it wasn't fun anymore and turned into more of a bad job, and then so that's where it kind of ended for me in college.
Okay, superb. Okay, so I guess for me, Mike, I've spoke to you on Twitter and kind of LinkedIn and stuff, and I think I came across you. I heard you the first time I ever heard you. I've seen you writing, in your tweets and stuff, but I think it was on Lloyd Dean's podcast.
Yes.
Is it Future of Learning? I think it's called.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome podcast. But for my guests who kind of don't know who you are, maybe you could give us a bit of a whistle stop tour of kind of your start from where you started through all the right to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I when I first got out of school, I started my first job. I was a programmer. I loved the logic challenges of that, but I really couldn't stand the solitude. So fast forward, I was in a job that I wasn't really crazy about, and I was young enough and single and had the flexibility. I just quit my job and didn't have anything lined up, and pretty shortly after that, I sort of saw a job posting in an adult education program. And I always thought, even when I was younger, like, teaching in some form would be a pretty cool job to have, and helping people and all that sort of stuff. So that sort of started me down learning path, or as a profession. And then the place I was teaching was a vocational school. They had some software training services that they offered. So I thought, oh, that sounds pretty cool. So I slid over, and I did some software training for a while. That led me, out of my hometown into Columbus, to the bigger city, and doing stand-up software training for a while sort of led to what I think is pretty natural evolution into, okay, well, I can teach this now. What about designing it? And so getting into some instructional design, and then next step beyond that is like, okay, well, I can do this for online experiences and stuff like that. And so it's been kind of, to me, a normal transgression through that. And I've been really super fortunate that I've been in some roles where I've gotten to do, all parts of it from beginning to end, from designing to developing and implementing. And for a while, I was a training department of one. So I feel really fortunate I've had the variety and the depth of background in all these different areas. And so, I feel, like I said, really, really fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Cool. Okay. So as it stands right this second, what does your typical day-to-day look like?
So I just recently left. I was at a startup for about 4 years and shifted gears. So I've been now 6 weeks into a consulting role. So I work for a consulting company, and I'm on a project, sort of big corporate software implementation project that a lot of people are probably somewhat familiar with. So on site at clients, pretty well 40 hours a week, and working with a team in a larger project team, working with training and planning it, ultimately, rolling it out, and again, kind of the front to back of that whole process for this training effort.
Cool. So I'm really intrigued, actually, because I've kind of been in a startup before and kind of gone into corporate and been into consultancy myself. I guess what's been, what do you see the biggest differences from like a startup environment right through to kind of, the large corporate environments, what we work in now, or in the consultancy environment? What do you think the biggest differences are?
I think the biggest difference from what I have seen is just from terms of flexibility. So when you're in a startup, at least the startup I was on, you have a lot more tools at your disposal. So you're typically not behind a firewall. If you compare that to sort of the bigger end of the corporate world, you've got firewalls. You can't even put software on your computer. It's very much more focused on things that you can't do, versus in the startup, the possibilities are comparatively endless. So I think that's probably the most significant difference for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? I guess when you're in the startup, you just pick the tool that gets the job done the best way. And yet,
Yeah.
and then we go into these kind of corporate consultancy worlds, that's kind of perceived. That's kind of already been kind of prescribed to you. This is a tool you're going to use. And, sometimes it's necessarily ticked the IT box, but not necessarily the user's box, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's, it really drastically cuts down the number of options for, the tools you can choose. And if there's not, some basic minimum of ecosystem in place, like it can be really tough, and you've got to be super, super creative to find ways to navigate through and around a lot of obstacles that you wouldn't have in other places.
Yeah, it just reminds me of I was working with a client, and basically they came to us to kind of say we need a collaborative community space, and it's got to be a place where we can work together and work in kind of little scrum teams or whatever, and just giving up the usual specifics of a good community and collaboration space. And I was sat there talking to him, and I said, well, you're kind of already using Slack. Why do you need us to build one for you when you've already figured out your patch to make that work? And the person was like, oh, it's a really good tool, Slack. I was like, so why can't you just really, flex and bend that to what meets your needs? Because it's going to be a lot more flexible than anything what you buy. And
I think, yeah, that's right. I think I just had a conversation with some folks online this week about, in fact, Slack. And it's also, the second piece is not just having the tool, but then using it in the right way or in the best way. And I think a lot of times, if you're using, like, Slack can be a great tool, but if it's being used as, just another place for email, like, that's not really the way. It's probably not the best use of it, if that makes any sense. Like, how you use it is also important. So those two things kind of have to go together.
Yep, I completely agree. I think it's interesting when, the kind of message what I asked the lady was like, why? And they said, oh, our company won't allow us to use Slack. And I was like, so you as a user has fixed out your way to work around this problem and actually probably get the real good results. But because the business can't use Slack, you're going to go out now and spend an absolute fortune on something what will do what probably Slack does, but just probably nowhere near as well. And
Right.
And it goes back to kind of you say, if you're using Slack to replace email, then all you've just got a like for like. You've got, rather than getting emails, you're just getting bombarded by text messages, but constant kind of instant message and whatnot. And it's kind of like for like if there's no kind of, not necessarily rules and processes, but kind of just guidelines.
Yeah. And that's was what my next thought was, like, if you've got a group of people and no two people have the same vision of how they're supposed to use it, right? Like, it just becomes just another place I have to go, and it can be seen as more of a problem than a solution, right?
Yeah, definitely. I love this community and kind of, it's not really necessarily community manager, but more community building role. I love the idea of kind of, my instant question is actually you don't need an LMS. What you need is a community. That's usually my go-to, and that, a lot of times that's what people need. But you think they want an LMS or whatever. But I kind of want to just touch upon you a little bit and a little bit about your story, if I could, Mike. So, in when we go for interviews and whatnot, and we're kind of drummed into us to say, okay, you should tell us, you should use this moment to say everything what you've done really, really great, and showboat a little bit. But actually, I think there's a better question to be asked there, and it's more along, actually, what does your failure resume or failure CV look like? And tell me more about that. So, given that question,
that's a bit harder of a question, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you get more. I think you get more from that. But assuming that now, right? What would your failure resume look like? What's been the biggest thing where potentially maybe you've either failed and it's been actually a real big positive later on down the line, or is there anything what kind of jumps out to mind?
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling to think about that. Can we come back to that? Can we circle back and let me think about it while we talk about something else?
Yeah, sure thing, okay. No problem. So, these questions, what I'm going to ask next, like, they can be, quick fire, or we can jump in deep term. I don't really mind. But if you was to give a gift of a book to 5 people, what book would you give?
I think one of my favorite books, and I'm not certain of the title, but I think it was Learned Optimism, and it was the guy who sort of was a pioneer, first started the whole field of positive psychology. And sort of the basic thing that I took away from that is, the way that you view the world and your perspective has far larger impact than most people probably think. And, if you have this positive attitude, they did a study, and I think they traced graduates from Harvard over the course of 40 or 50 years, and they found that didn't matter what your job was, didn't matter about a lot of other things that most people would think is important, how you perceive the world, and did you have good friendships, and really sort of elementary basic things that everyone would hope to have, and those had the biggest impact on obviously happiness, but then even longevity of how long you lived. And so for me, that's been kind of a pretty impactful book that I've read.
Oh, okay. I've never came across that one. I'll add that to my reading list for sure.
Yeah, it's really fantastic stuff.
Okay, this next question. So I guess, let's paint this beautiful picture. But basically, you've bought a billboard, and 1 million people are going to come out of a stadium, and we're going to see this message what you put on that billboard, and you're going to have a potential opportunity to change 1 million people's ideas or minds on something. What message would you put on that billboard?
Yeah, I think it's not anything that's sort of super creative or snazzy. It's just, the golden rule: be kind to people, be empathetic, put yourself in other people's shoes and treat them the way you would like to be treated, no matter what. I think that's pretty much it. If we could get more people in the world to do that, I mean, think of what could happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? It's kind of, sometimes it is the simplest things which get the most, the most traction, I guess. And something like, I think we see this a lot of time in corporate environments, we kind of overanalyze these big values and stuff and these behaviors, and actually it just comes down to be kind.
Absolutely. And doesn't matter the context, right? Like work or personal or at home or traveling or any of that sort of stuff. It just sort of is a universal thing that holds true, hopefully.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope. So when it comes to your, and this could be in your personal life or your professional, I guess, but so I use this analogy of an 80-20. So an example is, 80% of your contacts in your mobile phone, you only dial 20% at a time, where the other 20% you dial 80% at a time. So what's your biggest 80-20? I mean, it could be in your personal or professional life. What's your biggest 80-20 hack?
80-20 hack. Oh gosh, that's really good. So I think 80-20 hack is from sort of personal learning. And like I said, I'm really curious. And so I spend time every morning reading. I think last time I checked my feed reader, I had almost 800 subscriptions, right?
Whoa.
And so, which sounds like a lot, but I have that segmented, and it's in an 80-20 sort of thing. So I have my A list and I have a B list and I have everything else. So every day, the best stuff is in my A list. So I check that every day. If I find a few extra minutes, then I'll pop into my B list. And, if I have time on the weekends, or, sometimes I just don't get to the everything else. And, it's really a beautiful thing. You have a couple of hundred things there sitting there, you mark all as red, and it's like it never happened. So yeah. I think being able to just sort of segment what's really important. So that could be in any context, right? Like there's certain activities that obviously more important than others. If you can identify what your A list is and make that a priority, and then sort of, you'll get to the rest as you can, I think to me is a pretty powerful approach.
Okay. So, when I follow you on Twitter and stuff, I think you do share some really good nuggets, and sometimes it's tools and sometimes it's ideas and whatnot. But what and this could be desktop, mobile, whatever you like, it may not be any. But what tools are you really paying attention to at the moment? And this, again, could be professional or personal.
Yeah, so this is one that I found just this past week. Super slick. It's called Glide Apps, and what it does is it really can let anybody, literally anybody, build a mobile app, but it's all based on data in Google Sheets. And so I've seen, I shared it, and a couple people started playing with it. People have built mobile websites. They built portfolios, resumes. I've got a list of L&D conference that I keep all over the place, and I took that and put it into a Google Sheet, and I made an app out of that. So super slick. And I've got a few more ideas. I think our local ATD chapter, we're going to use that for our annual conference event app, and so that's one that sticks in my mind recently.
Wow. Okay, I'll have a play around that. And shout out to ATD. They put me in their recent magazine, and I think on their website, which was nice and out of blue. So yeah, big shout out to ATD, definitely.
Nice. I feel like I should ask for your autograph before the price goes up.
You will be the only person who asks for that. Don't worry. So okay, I'll put that in the show notes as well. That sounds like a really cool tool. And what I want to do now is I kind of want to get into a bit more about the learning. So hands up, hands in the air, kind of, I have been probably one of the few, probably a few many, who like to be on e-learning. And, it's an easy thing to beat. So I've tried to kind of hold back on e-learning now and not necessarily share my thoughts, but, try and look at it from a different perspective. But I'm going to quickly go through a few words. Buzzwords, and I want you to tell me the first thing what comes to mind when I say these words, Mike.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, first one is classroom.
Super valuable. I think expensive. I think we have to, when we bring people together in a classroom, we've got to really make sure that we're not wasting that opportunity and make sure that it's super high impact.
Okay. Next one is e-learning.
E-learning. So I heard your lead into that was not so good, but I think there's a place and time for that. So e-learning is definitely great in the right context, in the right situations, but we can't get into the place where we have an e-learning hammer and everything looks like a nail, and we try to apply it to everything.
Very true. Very true. And the last one, digital transformation.
I don't even know what that means. Honestly, right? Like we hear that all of the time. And I would guess that if you ask 10 people what that meant, that you would get 10 different answers. I don't know, maybe you have a good definition. Maybe you could enlighten me a little bit, but I'm not really sure when I hear that exactly what that means.
So my take on digital transformation, I mean, digital for me is just another enabler, right? It can target an area where our people are, fish where the fish live, all that stuff. Digital transformation is, I kind of see it from a more of a service design point, and actually our digital transformation has to touch every single point of that journey. So it has to interact with the people, the processes, the environment, and that is for me a digital transformation. It's not this one layer thing, it's kind of everything. So it is the environment, it is the people, it is the processes, it is the touch points. If you look at something from, say, an onboarding right away through, if you look at something from a employee life cycle from the beginning right through to the end.
Yeah, and I would agree with that totally, like especially the point about putting people in processes at the foundation of that. I get the sense that a lot of the things that I hear and read is some places are just say, okay, well, this is the latest buzzword or the latest trend, and they are doing it, but without the people and the processes at the center, then it's really just shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think this kind of leads me into my next question, really. So I think, for me personally, I think L&D is going through, and has been for a while, a little bit of an identity crisis. And I guess, we're still asking, I think it's always good to kind of self-assess the industry and go, are we still providing the value? Are we still doing the right things? Are we not? Blah, blah, blah. But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to ask you the question, like, where do you think L&D is right now? Do you think it's in an identity crisis, or do you think, it firmly knows what it is, what it isn't, and whatnot?
Well, I think two parts to that. So I think is kind of here in the United States, we have a saying like all politics is local, and in L&D, all situations are sort of unique. So whether, kind of back to what we were talking about before, if you're in a startup, it's one environment. If you're in a corporate, it's another environment. If you're in a corporate with a robust sort of learning approach to doing work, that's a set, versus some places there's little thought given to it. And so I think the situation you sit in is a huge factor in what that looks like. So I think to get to like a modern sort of approach to workplace learning, you've got to have a couple of those factors sort of fall into line. So it's hard for any one person to just come to a place and magically make all this stuff happen. But then on the other hand, I know I've seen a number of people and organizations who they just sort of revert to, we're just going to fall back to the default, the same old stuff that we've always done. And so I guess I would say the industry as a whole maybe are not advocating for new approaches as much as maybe we could, with the realization that there are other maybe external factors beyond our control sometimes, which aren't helping that along very much.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point you kind of mentioned, because, I think I see quite a lot there's a lot of people talking about the good life and the good fight, but then I also know some of these people aren't doing the things what they're, say, talking about on LinkedIn, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of becomes this a bit smoke and mirror environment sometimes, you know. It's kind of, yes, we've got ideas and whatnot, and I love that. I think that's probably one of the strongest points of L&D is we share quite a lot, you know. I think there's, you know, I have a real dilemma with that, because I think in one hand L&D shares a lot, but then I also think it's probably one of the biggest industries where we want people to share, and actually we're slowly putting people off from sharing. And I can probably touch upon that in a little second, a little bit more. But let me ask you this question then. Kind of, you know, we talk about this modern workforce and this this modern environment and whatnot. But if the L&D function was to be wrapped up as a person, do you think, given where it is right now, the business would have sacked L&D by now?
I think we would be in danger of that. Yes. I think, one of the things that I see in the places that I have been is if we want to do things like digital transformation, we have to start with ourselves. So we have to start thinking of new ways to do things. And, back to your failure thing, we've got to experiment and try new things. One of the lessons that I learned a while back was there's a lot of power in calling something a pilot. So I had a director that I was working with at one point. We were trying to get access, I don't know, some social media tool or something like that. And we're trying to take our case to our, the IT powers that be. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just call it a pilot. And it sort of set a light bulb off to me. And so we went to him like, oh yeah, it's fine. You're just doing a pilot. It's no big deal. So if we can try new things, and, if that's the key that unlocks the door for us to prove the value of certain things, that's great. Yeah, obviously that it doesn't always work, but I guess I don't have the sense that there are very many, as a whole, people in our field who have that sort of approach and that sort of thinking.
Yeah, I think a lot of people. I think there's a good few people who have that thinking and be wanting that. Everyone wants that environment, right? But I think actually the business say we want this, but then providing this environment to fail multiple times to get the right thing at the end. I don't think necessarily we see this in corporate environments where the business kind of, sometimes what I'm trying to say, I think, is sometimes the business is its own bottleneck with stuff like this.
Yeah, I think another thing that I think that we could do better as a field is we need to sort of be voracious learners ourselves. We need to be sort of ruthlessly efficient at learning what we need to learn. And then we need to transfer that to the people in our organizations to teach them, like, they don't need us in the middle doling out prescribed doses of learning. Like, you need to take some ownership of yourself and your own learning. Like, you can control that. And there are some digital tools that can help that become really efficient and valuable. So we almost have to teach people new ways of learning. And I think we should be at the leading edge of that. And if we can just think how powerful an organization would be if we had people that were digitally skilled, learning what they needed to learn, sharing with each other, and not requiring that learning run through any sort of formal learning department. Like, that's a pretty powerful concept to me, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with L&D, we kind of, nobody wants to put themselves out of a role, right, either. But the only way we're going to put ourselves out of a role is, like you say, by being static and by kind of not constantly having that open mindset to new ideas and, new tools and new ways of thinking. Because I think personally, my take on L&D, should it have been sacked? I think probably, yeah. And the reason behind this, I think my take on it is given what L&D is now, it should have been sacked, because if you get teams who work in collaboration properly, marketing, comms, someone from product, service design, all these can do what we do, given the tools of Google and whatnot. I think there's a good argument to argue the case of, if all your teams work efficiently and collaborate, there probably isn't a room for L&D. Maybe it's an evolution of L&D, the team. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I kind of go back and forth on, would we sack him, would we not?
I think you say a lot of things there that resonate with me. So especially comms and marketing and all this stuff, it's like those groups have got the same goals as we do, right? Like they're trying to get people's attention. They're trying to get some sort of behavior change generally. Like it's the same goal as us, but I think overall, like they do it a lot better. They do it more efficiently. And, I would love to work myself out of a job in that way, because then I'm going to be able to move on to something else of value versus, I've had conversations recently about training organizations and departments, are getting cut and they're outsourcing and they're doing all this stuff. So, I would rather be out of a job from doing that sort of good stuff than be out of a job from being sacked or outsourced. So I would take that risk every day, and I would be happy to lose my job because it was so successful.
And I think you nailed it actually there with the kind of, we look at, say, marketing and digital marketing. They have so much data on us as users, as people, as, it kind of makes sense. It makes less sense not to tap into that understanding of people. We see it now in kind of L&D, I mean, I use L&D as a term, but people are starting slowly but surely coming around to human-centered design and design thinking approach and empathizing and whatnot. But fundamentally, if you look at the 5 key elements, depending on which way you follow design thinking, marketing have been doing this for a while. They have been empathizing with their customers for a while. They have been collecting data. They know what works, what doesn't work. Kind of, I guess what I'm thinking is, actually, how do we just remove that barrier between the marketing and the L&D function?
Well, if you figure that out, I would love to know, because I think that would be a great benefit to learning folks. I've been talking about that in places for a while now, that there's a lot of things that marketing does that learning just needs to steal or borrow, maybe not steal, but the things that they do, the way they present things, I think they've had such a head start of being tied to results that a lot of learning folks, they don't have that direct through line. So they have been forced to hone in on what works. And like you said, they do testing, they do A/B testing, and over time, they figure out. And they are like light years ahead of the learning field, because they've had to do that work and they've had to do the trial and error. And now they recognize that, I'm competing with thousands of messages every day, just like we are, right? They recognize it. I think sometimes training folks thinks people are waiting around for the next e-learning course to come out, which is way far from being true. And they recognize, like, okay, well, I've got to use some sort of research-based psychological approach, like, okay, what gets their attention? Okay, colors and graphics and emotion is what drives behavior, and it's not a bullet point list of facts. So I think there's a lot of us to learn from those other areas.
Yeah, and I think it's things like you say, like user segmentation. I'm still yet to come across an L&D function what does that really well. And actually, I think once you start doing that, and you can kind of start becoming a little bit more personalized with how you engage and whatnot, and then, at the opposite end, you've got this kind of, if you look at anyone who's, Mike, I'm sure you've got a marketing funnel set up somewhere, but actually a marketing funnel is just a real good comms and engagement touch point view.
Yeah.
We don't even use that in learning. We don't say, okay, what does our funnel look like for our people?
Yeah, or like marketers, they have content strategies, right? It's not just, everything is not television ads. So, right, like you have multiple channels, and certain channels are targeted at where people are in certain phases of the funnel, right? So, for example, in a learning context, a funnel, you don't treat somebody who doesn't even know what you're doing the same way as you treat maybe somebody who's an expert that's been doing it for years, right? Like, and so that type of segmentation and identifying and then adapting your content to match that, it totally fits with the things that we do. And marketers, like I said, they're just light years ahead.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I had a digital marketeer on, Paul Fryer. He worked for a large construction company over here, and I met him probably about 2 years ago at a conference I was speaking at, and he was doing a talk there. And his approach to kind of getting new apprenticeships on, new apprenticeships and grads, it was just so refreshing to see, because I kind of had this conversation with him. It was like, you could blend into learning really, really quick because you're so light years ahead of a lot of people in there, because they're not looking at other industries and they're not looking and going, I'm going to steal that because I can remix it and remold it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the next great, and this is, I'm using quotes here, but the next kind of big, great thought leader, if you like, I don't like that word, but will be someone who's come from marketing and been dropped. Someone who jumps out to mind, actually. Gemma Critchley from Aviva.
Mm-hmm.
She has this marketing background, and Charlie Neen as well. They have this marketing background, and how they look at L&D is just so refreshing. So refreshing.
Yeah, I that's exactly the thought as you were just saying that. Particularly the part about somebody from marketing being easily able to translate into learning context and be successful. And I think if you had somebody, maybe most people going the other direction, it'd be a much different story.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to get into the topic of e-learning, Mike. So for me, like I mentioned, I'm not a keen lover of it, and when I say e-learning, I mean the click next type of e-learning. Okay, let's clear that one up. But yeah, I mean, ID design in general, I don't know. It's I'm probably bringing in past bias and whatnot. But yeah, how are these? What, in fact, it's a 2-point question actually. When I think about it, one, kind of, how do we sell? We know businesses want e-learning in, and in their eyes it's that kind of silver bullet. But I think how are they staying relevant is probably the question. Like, how are these ID learners staying relevant in this world? What's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a fair number of places where people are sort of the e-learning equivalent of McDonald's. They're just waiting for somebody to pull up and say, "Hey, can you give me a course?" And as opposed to, well, yeah, I would be happy to build you this e-learning course. Would you also like to hear about other maybe more efficient, effective, cheaper alternatives? And I think that's the reframing that is often being missed. And instead of just saying, yes, I'll be back with this on Friday with your e-learning course, that kind of relating back to our marketing conversation, right? We need to have a conversation and have a bigger tool set of, okay, what are we trying to solve for first before we look at any kind of delivery channels or that sort of stuff. So, and again, the context you're in obviously has a big impact on how that process works. But to me, even if you're unsuccessful, if you've had the conversation and they're like, yeah, I don't care, just give me the e-learning course, I think we owe it to ourselves, because you can imagine when you don't have the conversation and you build a course and it goes into the world and it has no impact, or it fails poorly, the executive or the manager or whoever came to you requesting the course, they're not going to blame themselves. Like, well, your e-learning course was bad. Whereas if we had the conversation, hey, are you open to other things? You may not always succeed, but I feel like we owe it to ourselves to be a professional, right? So, if you're not having these types of conversations, you're not aware of, not everything looks like the e-learning nail, then can you really call yourself a professional at that point?
It's a great question, actually, because I mean, it's a skill set. Like, don't get me wrong. I think building e-learning and good. When I say good e-learning, I mean good
Yeah.
instructional design is a skill by far. And I guess some of the things that I've noticed in our industry now is people are dropping the e-learning. When it was a big term and everyone wanted e-learning, all of a sudden we've seen e-learners everywhere, e-learning designers, and now obviously because we're kind of coming back from that, I think we're slowly seeing the removal of the terms in job descriptions and job titles. But I just think, like, what's the best piece of an instructional design you've ever seen? Maybe not. Maybe it's not even one what you've kind of built or anything, Mike. What's the one over the space of time? What's the one what jumps out to mind for you?
Well, I think in general, it's instructional design that to me it appeals to me is well, first of all, it's appealing, right? It's something that draws you in. There's a clear some sort of a value offering to me, speaks to me. It's something that I want to do or need to do, and it's clear. Something that respects my intelligence and my time, right? Like I don't want to see 22 slides of objectives and mission statements, and like nobody cares about that. But something that I can get in, I can get whatever that value proposition is, I get it, and then I can instantly be better quickly. And so something that leads me to be able to do something I couldn't do before, something that gives me an insight that's valuable. And I think it's the efficiency of that process is one of the big draws for me personally.
Okay. So just to play devil's advocate, and I am playing devil's advocate here. So when a business comes to you and kind of says, okay, we want this instructional design or whatnot, just going back to kind of what you're saying, can we call ourselves, professionals if we just do it without challenging? And if there's an easy example to say, actually, you just need a resource rather than, you just need a job aid or whatnot. You don't necessarily need to know the 250-page PDF of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So how, this is probably for some of the guys who listen here from kind of the e-learning background and whatnot. How do you challenge that? What would your approach be to challenge that to maybe a large stakeholder? I always use the example of GDPR because that, over here, that was a beast to itself. But maybe yeah. What's been your past examples of that?
Yeah, so I think if we're honest, and obviously how that conversation goes, it depends largely on your relationship with that stakeholder, right? So should sort of go without saying that, your key stakeholders, you should try to build good relationships with. That's kind of easier said than done probably, but it's something that's pretty central to the way the conversation goes. But if we're honest and we have a good relationship with those people, and if it's really all we're doing is checking the box, well, then let's just check the box and move on and let people get back to work. Let's not send them down a 60-minute journey of clicking next and getting to stuff that's not going to change anybody's behavior. Yeah, it looks pretty and it's jazzy and all that stuff, but like, let's just be honest. Let's check the box and move on. Because I've seen a ton of stuff. I mean, compliance drives a lot of training activities, and I've seen a lot of things that are 60-minute versions of checking the box. Well, why are you making me waste an hour if that's really truly all it is? So I think, part of that first part's just being honest. The second part of reframing is, one of my favorite things is sort of a trick from improv. Like when you're in an improv skit, you never say no. It's always yes and so if you can sort of use that technique, well, yes, I'm happy to build you this e-learning course, and here's 4 other potential options that may be better, cheaper, faster, whatever. Would you be interested in that? My experience is there's not very many people who say no when you're offering them something better, faster, cheaper. And so that's something that's worked well in those conversations for me personally.
Okay. You mentioned improv. Is this something you've done in the past?
No, it's just I read it somewhere along the line, and I've seen a couple examples of it happen. And, especially in my personal life, I get in a disagreement with my wife or something. If you say no or if you say but, she tells me, like, well, when you say that, everything after that, like, I just disregard. And so there's probably some human psychology involved in that. But, if I say yes and confirm what they've said and say and instead of no but, it's and most people probably have an experience with this, whether it's in personal life or whatever. It's just a different experience.
Yeah, it's the removing but and replacing with and is something I learned probably a few years back. Actually, it was in coaching when I was going through kind of coaching my team members and whatnot. But I was just really intrigued then, because it's really interesting you mentioned improv. One of the things which I've noticed quite recently, I'm thinking about doing stand-up, and I like the idea of it scares the life out of me, so 100% I should do it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've noticed in the L&D communities, there's a lot of people who's done improv or stand-up or whatnot, so I was just kind of like, ooh, are you another one of the chosen few who's gone through kind of improv and whatnot?
I'm not. The closest I can get is, bad dad jokes with my kids every morning. But I worked with somebody at the startup I was at who went through a program at Second City in Chicago. So I can see the link to that.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Hey, and there's nothing wrong with bad dad jokes, Mike. Don't you worry about that.
I entertain nobody else but myself, but that's okay.
So I guess kind of just sticking one more question probably on this ID kind of instructional design and whatnot. So if we've got people who are in the dilemma of, I am sick of doing, the typical instructional design, what free sites would you advise? Maybe it's sites, maybe it's people to follow. What free sites, free people, whatnot, who would you recommend to follow for instructional design?
So are you saying in the context of trying to do things differently or do something entirely different?
It can be any. Take it however you want, Mike.
Yeah, so I think just to do things better and do things well from instructional design perspective, I think it's pretty hard to beat Kathy Moore. She's got really fantastic stuff in sort of workplace learning stuff. Jane Hart publishes a lot of really good stuff and talks about a lot of these alternatives other than traditional training or classroom or e-learning. Mark Britz is a person I really like his stuff. He sort of has the sort of social aspect to a lot of the stuff, and I think the things that he writes and talks about is going in the right direction, and it's kind of helping us connect people with people, sort of that concept. From a marketing perspective of the world, Seth Godin is fantastic. He publishes every day, and it's 9 out of 10 times it's just things that will change your perspective and change your view on not just your work but the world. So those I think are probably 4 pretty good places to start.
Yeah, I've tried to get Seth on the podcast twice now, and every time he's declined me. But I will get him on. I will.
Yeah,
I've just got to
good
figure
luck.
it out.
He was just the keynote at the big ATD International Conference this week.
Oh wow! Did you? Is that something you went to, or?
I wasn't there, but I heard lots of people raving about what he had to say, which isn't surprising at all.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I came across Seth's book Tribes years ago. Well, I say years ago. I came across it probably 2 years after I built a community, and I was like, I kind of did it, and then when reading Seth's book afterwards, I was like, that makes sense now why it worked.
Mm-hmm.
So his book's great. I think I've read like 2 or 3 of Tribes, Purple Cow. I think he's just released a new one as well.
Yeah, everything he does is fantastic.
Yeah, he does that all MBA as well, which looks interesting.
Yeah, I actually met somebody who went through that, and she just totally raved about it. So
Ah.
um, it sounds like a really cool experience.
Yeah, it sounds pretty intense, um, but one worth definitely probably going on. It's on my list of things to do, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, just in your free time, right? All that spare time, you have nothing else. You're just sitting around doing nothing.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've got bags of it, Mike. Bags of it. So some random questions now, kind of just wrapping up a little bit, Mike. But if, say, for instance, we knew the world was going to end tomorrow, okay, and you had to leave instructions to jolt the next generation of people who come to Earth, what instructions would you leave?
Ooh, man, you're not giving me any easy ones here. So, it kind of sort of applies, without having the world to end. I think it kind of applies in a lot of ways to our world now, right? Like you just have to take care of yourself, right? That can apply to yourself, from physically, mentally, to what we're doing to the land we live on, right? Like, is it really worth extracting the last drop of oil if the water is all poison, right? Like you just have to take care of yourself. I think yourself and the people around you. So that'd be it. Hope that's not like too deep or anything.
No, I love deep. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, which is going to be very deep. So don't you worry. So
Fasten my seatbelt.
yes, exactly. So okay. So I guess that kind of it's very true, and I think that kind of look after yourself. We see that more and more in corporate environments now. Kind of this mental well-being and being aware to that kind of when you're not being kind to yourself and when you're not giving yourself the time out what you need. So I think that's a really good, good set of instructions, definitely.
Yeah, there a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there's things like that. They're really, it's simple concept, but it's just not always easy to actually do. So it sounds so simple, but sometimes it can be really hard. Simple is often hard.
Yeah, it's very true, very true. So next question. This is a deep one, and we'll go back to the kind of failure one afterwards. But do you even like yourself?
Do I like myself? Yes, I do like myself. So I don't know if that's, hopefully it's not in a sort of self-centered way, but I don't think there's anything big. We all have our failings and our failures and stuff. But yeah, I think if I were someone else, I think I would like to hang out with myself. So yeah, I do like myself.
Good, good. I find that question a strange one because we never. I don't think we get to ask ourselves that question quite a lot. Do I like who I am? Do I like where I'm going? Do I like what I'm thinking? I think it's an interesting question where you can probably probe on it a lot longer and kind of go, yeah, this is good. This is one of them traits. But then the flip side of that is you can get yourself into this spiral where
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and obviously things happening around you impact that as well. Like you have times when you're thinking and self doubt and those kind of things. But yeah, I think I like that question a lot. Now I'm going to ask you: do you like yourself? You have to answer
ooh,
it.
ooh, um, no, and yeah, it's a good bit of a get out. Um, I like myself probably 80% of the time, 70% of the time. Um, I reckon the other 30% not so much. I think I could do more. I think I could give more. Um, I think I think I could probably judge less as well. In fact, I know I could judge less. So I do like myself. I think fundamentally I am. I try to see the best in everybody. I try if I've got time. If there's an hour where I can chill out or an hour where I can go and help someone, I'll try and always go and help that person. So it's that kind of yeah, I do. I think I do, but only
Yeah.
70% of the time, which is always room for improvement, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I couldn't go as far as like you went further than me in putting percentages on it, but everything you just said there resonates with me too. So would be riding in a similar boat.
This is good. This is good because we I think we're going to meet in June at the is it Learn Tech Day? Are we?
Yeah, I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. It'd be good to actually grab a beer and just have a good old chat. So yeah, I'll make sure
You're,
I come over and
it's
grab it.
isn't it like illegal to go to Belgium and not grab a beer?
I think so. That's what I've heard. So
National law or something I heard.
yeah, so we'll have to just make full use of that law for
I don't
sure.
want to run the risk of being imprisoned while I'm there, so I better take care of it.
So okay, so I guess kind of you know, going back to that kind of that failure resume and the one time where you failed, but actually it's been a positive later on down the line. Did anything come to mind on that?
Yeah, so not so much in a specific sense, but just it used to be, I don't know if it's maybe not scared, but hesitant or resistant to when I saw conflict. I would tend to shy away from that or avoid it. And I've come to learn that not all conflict is bad. Sometimes conflict can have positive results. And I think I've always had sort of a negative growing up. I thought, oh, you don't want to have conflict. That's bad. And now I've sort of gotten to a new place where well, some conflict is bad, but some conflict is good. And you know, while I don't seek it out, if I see chances for something to get resolved or something to get fixed or whatever the case might be, I'm still working on it, but I'm trying to maybe gently lean into that as opposed to pulling away. And I think of times in the past when something is wrong but you don't say something. Typically it's not uncommon for things to kind of blow up or something to get off the rails as a result of that. So that's probably generically um, what I would say for that, if that's
Okay, okay. So I guess just kind of kind of coming to the end now on this one, Mike. But what what 5 tips? I use 5. It can be 3. Don't worry. But
okay.
what 5 tips would you give to someone who's in an instructional design in L&D and kind of either to stay relevant or look into new I don't know instructional design approaches or whatnot? What 5 tips would you give? And it could be someone who's new to the game, or it could be someone who's in there and kind of challenging their mindset, maybe.
Yeah, so I think the first one is be curious, like find out what other people are doing, get outside of your own field. um, Always look for different or better ways to do things. Don't just sort of hit that bare minimum and set it on cruise control. So be curious, do the reading, keep up with the latest in your field. Again, I think that's part of being a professional, whether you're in L&D or any profession, right? I think you owe it to yourself and the people that you're working for. um, Another one is have empathy for the people that are on the other side of your e-learning or whatever you're working on. um, have some empathy and consider things from their point of view. I think that's a really important uh, thing to be successful. um, let's see what else. That's only 2. um,
Could I
yeah, I don't
maybe
know. Go ahead.
could I maybe interrupt? Maybe let's have
Yes, please.
just
Yeah.
to look at this and go. Actually, how do you stay relevant? Like, how do you stay relevant on the new tech? What's coming? Like, how do you do that?
Well, so I listen to podcasts like yours, and I read what people share. I mean, one of the coolest things I think about our field is there's so many people who share so much really great stuff. And whether it's e-learning people sharing their files and templates and stuff, or people writing about experiences and things that worked and didn't work, and just being open. I think anybody who doesn't tap into that is really, I think it's a failure if you're not seeking that sort of stuff and trying to apply it to yourself. And just it boggles my mind when I run into people and they call themselves learning professionals, but they don't learn, Like it doesn't compute in my head. I can't for the life of me figure it out that you're working in this field, but you're not learning yourself. And far too many times I've had conversations with people that, I don't have time to that. Like, what? You don't have time not to learn, right? Like, how do you get better? How do you get more efficient if you're not learning? So that's a really big thing to me, and you've probably picked up, as I've mentioned it, 800 times about, I'm a big learner, but I don't think it's just me. I think, like I said earlier, if you're going to be a professional, you wouldn't want to go to your surgeon who quit learning 20 years ago to operate on you, would you? Right? Like, that's insane.
That's a great example.
He's going to, drill holes in your brain and let the bad spirits out or something, But there's equivalence to that in every field. And so, I would encourage people not to be that type of person.
Okay. Good shout. I guess going full circle now, Mike, and coming to the end. So at the beginning, I asked you to pick, I think it was 4 numbers. And the idea is this. These 4 numbers tally up to a random list of items on my iPad. And I want you you're on a desert island, and I want you to tell me what you would do with these 4 items.
Okay.
So your items were a coat hanger, a picture frame, a boombox, and a helmet.
All right. Well, the obvious one is I'm going to use the coat hanger and the boombox to find a radio signal. So that's 2 of them.
Okay.
And I'm by myself, right?
Yep.
The frame, I'm going to find some tree bark or something, and I'm going to draw a picture of my family to put in the frame. And what was the 4th item?
Helmet.
A helmet. I'm going to use to catch the condensation and get some drinking water.
Awesome. Straight up survival skills there, Mike. I love it.
We can't do much else if we're not alive. So we got to survive.
It's true. That is very true.
So I love that ending, by the way. That's pretty creative.
So I guess kind of, right at the opening of the show, I kind of said to you, when you was in school, your teacher would ask you, what is it you want to be growing up? And as you've mentioned throughout the podcast, we never really stop developing and growing. So if I was to ask you this question now, Mike, what is it you want to be when you grow up? What would you say?
Well, I would say 2 things. I am grateful every day to be doing what I do. I love what I do. I have days when, you have the thought where, hey, this is pretty cool and pretty fun, and they're paying me. And so that's one piece of it. And the other piece of it is just to be a good dad and a good husband and family person. So I hope that, when my kids grow up, they can say, hey, I had a pretty good role model.
Nice. Okay. So, Mike, where can people find you? Where can we find you digitally, like online?
Yeah, pretty easy to find. My website, mike-taylor.org. I publish a newsletter every Friday of the top things I found in the world of learning, design, and technology. On Twitter, I am TMikeT, and share a bunch of things on LinkedIn and a couple other places. But in any of those places there, you can find me pretty easily.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Mike. Thanks very much for coming onto the show.
My pleasure. And I look forward to sharing that beer with you in Belgium here soon.
Oh, yes. Indeed. Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely.
Catch you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.